Welcome back to Eliminate the Gap. We're so glad to have you with us here. Eric, what's been going on?
I tell you, as you can tell, I'm a vagabond. I am moving and I am out and about in different places every time, it seems. I am at Tindley Accelerated High School in Indianapolis, and it's a wonderful school. Maybe someday we can chat more in depth about it. But I'm here helping launch a makerspace, which is a wonderful strategy. I'm sure many of you out there have employed in your schools and your after-school programs, but it's an excellent engagement enrichment strategy for young people. So we're launching one here, and so I'm in the midst of getting that kind of going. So that's kind of what's been consuming some of my time. Yeah, I know the viewers want to know how the football team's doing. So
Hey,
last weekend,
the football team's doing great right now. We are currently, what, 3-1 at this present point in time.
what?
So yeah, it's we're excited. We're headed and trending in the right direction. And we had a, very exciting game this past week. It was our homecoming. So, that's
Oh my,
always
you got to
good
win
to get
homecoming. You got to win homecoming, that's for sure.
that.
Well, that's awesome. I'm glad things are heading the right direction. So a couple just housekeeping things. One, in Dell and myself and Raul when he's here. Can't thank you all enough for clearly continuing to be loyal viewers, listeners to the podcast, as well as sharing it clearly with folks. We've consistently the last several episodes have been well over 10,000 listens. And we're just amazed by that, and that's awesome.
Really,
and of course, our most recent guest, Karen Pittman, people really loved that. And it was very good content, and Karen brought it. So just wanted to kind of put those things out there.
yeah, truly humbled by just your expressions of love for us, and really just thinking back, I've thought back numerous times about our last interview with Karen and just how awesome she was, and just as we all are working in the field and trying to shape it, and I'm continuing to think around this opportunities we have with the mental aspect of pushing forward youth development right now is something that's constantly on my mind.
Oh, I'm sure, and I get to talk about it, and I get to sometimes be involved with it like I am this evening. But man, you and all the other teachers and folks that are much closer on the front lines every day, I know that it's a challenge, but man, you guys are doing some great stuff. So again, as always, thank you to you, but also to the others out there we know that are listening. So we've got a guest coming up here shortly, who has run, I think, the largest school-based after-school program in the country. If not, it's pretty doggone close. Eric Gurna, who just, in the past few days has actually stepped down as CEO of LA's Best, just a premier after-school program. And so we're very fortunate to be able to chat with him today, and also maybe get some insight on what's next for him. All right, so welcome back to Eliminate the Gap. And as promised, we're so excited to have Eric Gurna joining us from LA's Best. And we look forward to having just a robust conversation about the status of youth development, particularly in the after-school arena. So we look forward to that. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
You bet.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and get started kicking this off there, Eric, because LA's Best prides itself on working with schools to develop motivated learners. So just want to know how difficult that's been coming off the recent pandemic and getting students back in the classroom. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I'm sure as a teacher, and both of you working with kids or working with people who work with kids, it's been incredibly difficult. It's been painfully difficult. I mean, it's always difficult work, right? even before COVID. But, you know, during the pandemic, I mean, we are still in the pandemic, but during the sort of initial phase of the pandemic, LA's Best staff were enlisted as part of our partnership with the school district to really respond to the most basic needs of children and families. So we were out there. I say we, but I don't like to say that because I wasn't actually out there. Our team was out there distributing food, hundreds of thousands, actually, you know, hundreds of thousands of meals a day across Los Angeles, distributing food. We ended up managing COVID testing sites, helping to manage them in partnership with other departments of the school district, supervising children in person at a time when, you know, everybody was saying all schools were closed and nobody was in person in Los Angeles, but it wasn't ever actually true. There was always some people on campus, and children with the greatest needs, children experiencing homelessness, foster youth, and the children of essential district employees were on campus for many months. Not a lot of them, but it was way before vaccines were available, and our staff were the ones there supporting them in their distance learning that they were doing from the school campus, which is like layers of complicatedness and confusion, right? But so it's been incredibly difficult. And then the coming back, bringing back kids and families to schools has not been, you know, an easy or simple thing. It wasn't like, you know, schools were closed and then they announced schools were open and everybody came back. It was, you know, this in the springtime, we did sort of a phased reopening in Los Angeles. The then superintendent of Los Angeles Unified School District announced that all children and families who sent their kids back to in-person schooling, which was just a couple days a week, phased in cohorts in the spring, would also have access to free childcare from the time their cohort was over. And cohorts were only about 2.5 hours, either before the cohort or after the cohort till the end of the day. And who did they expect to provide those services? It was programs like LA's Best, not only LA's Best, other programs across LA. You know, no one consulted the organizations or the programs to see, was that feasible? Was there capacity? You know, it was just, we got the funding and we got to motivate these families to come back. So let's go. And so, you know, when things happen in that kind of crisis, sort of triage environment, it's very, very difficult for the people who have to actually execute those policies. And so cut to, you know, a summer program, which was challenging. We can get into that if you want, but, and then, you know, a few weeks ago in fall, with everything opening up, you know, it's very, very difficult on so many levels for our staff, and a lot of them haven't come back. I mean, just like most after school programs across the country, we are short staffed right now. And, you know, that's a larger issue than just expanded learning. It's an economic issue in our country, and, you know, go down that road too if you want to, because there are structural issues there. But there are also people who are afraid or unwilling to come back in the new reality that we're facing.
You know, it's interesting. Your former colleague, maybe still colleague, Jennifer Brady, was one of the first to raise it up on this podcast to Delmar and I about the potential shortage of staff going into the summer. She was very concerned and had heard a lot of at least anecdotally, you know, that was going to be a problem, and it certainly was and continues to be still. So it's just interesting as we sit here now, several months later, and it's, you know, still the ripples are being felt. You know, Eric, it's interesting. One of the things that we talk about regularly on this podcast is the relationship between youth development and schools and formal school setting, and how, at least for some of us, that's a challenge where young people go through school and they have their day, and then we, in the after school environment or out of school time, have young people, and we employ this thing, youth development, that might be foreign, you know, to what they experience, you know, during the school day. So LA's Best has clearly had some success in that regard. And so help us understand, help the listeners understand a little bit about what you've been able to do to help bridge that gap.
Well, it's a big question. I mean, first of all, I mean, I'm now the former CEO of LA's Best. I want to be clear about that, but I am still working very closely with them as senior advisor for the rest of this year, and have been a part of LA's Best in one way or another since the late '90s. And I would say that despite our name, which I didn't create, it was created a long time ago by Mayor Tom Bradley, who founded the program in 1988. We don't think that we have it all figured out. We don't think that just because we have this very large scale program and a long-standing model and have had a lot of success, that doesn't mean that it's not a continual reinvention, of how we create that bridge for children to be able to, fully engage in the after school program and be successful in school. I'll say that I think it's, in many ways, the disconnect you're talking about between the formal instruction of the regular school day and the positive youth development model after school. I do feel like it's much less at odds than it once was in terms of, like, at least around the language that people are using and around the systems. I think a lot of what we've been talking about in the expanded learning field for decades around social emotional learning, and one time we called it character development, and there was a big focus on conflict resolution and asset-based versus deficit-based, and we have all these different constructs that we use to try to really get people engaged in the ideas. It's more than just jargon. It's words or ways to get it to change the culture, right, and change the practice. But it also is these, like, different ways of describing much of the same thing. And I would say that it's the tail has wagged the dog a bit to the point that, like, when we used to get teased, honestly, for talking about social emotional learning too much, for talking about whole child too much. If I was doing staff development with a group of teachers or a mixed group of after school staff and teachers, teachers would say things like, "Oh, it's that kumbaya stuff," or which is like a very efficient diss, because it's dissing a song that has an esteemed history, and it's also dissing standing in a circle and having community together. Like, that's a corny thing. And so that there used to be a lot of that. We don't get that so much anymore. There's much more. There's the mainstreaming of the trauma-informed approach of social emotional growth being not only equal to the importance of academic success and intellectual development, but actually necessary for it and completely intertwined with it, right? Like, you don't really have one without the other. We finally stopped talking about non-cognitive skills, right? Like, as though thinking about how we communicate and develop relationship is not a cognitive skill, right? So it's like things have come together in many ways. And I think that has created more respect and more equal partnership between the regular school day and the expanded learning world. And in LA specifically, so LA's Best was founded in 1988. And so we have a generation of teachers now who participated in after school programs themselves, right? And when they became teachers and now are school leaders, they don't know a world where after school programs aren't a significant part of the school community. It's not an add-on thing or an extra, don't break my chalk, no, you can't use my room. There's more like, oh, this is a collective effort. This is a communal property, literally, and we have to work together. That's not to say we don't still have the issues of, like, you broke my chalk, just writ large, and that we don't still have sort of ego and identity sort of issues in conflict oftentimes between regular school day and after school. But I think it's much more nuanced and in some ways improved from, like, when I started in the field, at least in the 90s. And the way that we build community between the after school program and the regular school day is by ensuring that our team, our staff, our site coordinators and other staff understand that their main job is building relationships, right? So it's not delivering content, and it's not executing, program quality assessments or paperwork, although all those things are required, but it's building relationships. But something that I've thought about a lot recently is that that's easy for me to say as a full-time, well-compensated professional in expanded learning. But if you don't have the conditions given to you to be able to prioritize building relationships, and you're told you need to submit this paperwork, et cetera, then the tangible, concrete tasks that you're going to get quote in trouble for are going to take priority. So if you're a part-time site coordinator and you're not being given the time, the resources, and the support to be able to give you some breathing room, because building relationships takes space and time, and it takes being centered and not frazzled and scrambled and chasing paperwork and chasing kids literally and filling in for that staff member who's not there because you got to be in ratio. If we can't create that space and that set of supports, then we're sort of like pontificating about this vision, but not really equipping people to execute it.
So as a leader, clearly, I mean, you articulating it, clearly you believe it. So it helps that part-time site coordinator maybe begin to understand, hey, the culture here, at least at LA's Best, is to do that, is to take that time, is to, even though the realities sometimes are creating tension, you still have the support of the folks that maybe you report to, that, you know, in order to get that executed.
I think that the rhetoric alone gets old quick if your day-to-day isn't backing it up, right? And that's what, unfortunately, that's what we've had, especially in crisis with COVID, right? Like, we can talk about all that stuff, but I mean, when people are so slammed to, you know, staff up their program and distribute these meals to hungry families, and just like the most basic, when I say most basic services, I mean, like in terms of Maslow, like at the bottom of that period, the most essential, the most important services. And if people aren't, you know, if we, as a tangible example, if we're not paying our staff for time that they're not with the kids, right? If the only time we're paying them is when they're actually with the kids, and we're telling them to develop relationships with the school day and focus on their own professional development and be prepared, how do they do that if they're with the kids all the time, right? And so, you know, when I think about like what you're saying, I worry about becoming one of those leaders who's out at conferences, on podcasts, you know, in different settings, talking about all this great stuff, which I do really believe. But then if we can't match it on the ground, and it's also not just up to us, it's how the funding is structured, it's what is prioritized even in the larger culture, et cetera. But if we can't create the conditions, if we don't recognize that it's structural, it's not just rhetorical or energetic, like we just believe in this so much that everybody should just feel the wind beneath their wings. Like, that's necessary. That spirit, that energy is necessary, but it's not sufficient.
Well, I know Del wants to jump in, but let me just say one last thing, because I think, so I was trying to laud the, honestly, whether it's rhetoric or not, it's when I visited there, I feel but it was pre-COVID, so things are a little different, clearly, you know, with that kind of compression. But in business and in lots of other places, what gets done is what we used to say, we inspect what we expect, right? Mm-hmm. And so if I'm judging, if I'm doing merit increases, if I'm doing those kinds of things equally based on the relationship side of the development, and not just did I hit my numbers, did I maintain my ratio, did I, you know, get certain academic achievement, you know, and that's where I feel like the field still gets challenged sometimes, and maybe we can spend a whole separate amount of time about why and all of that. But anyway, I agree with what you're saying. I just I feel that maybe you all are doing it better than some others, and I just want to, you know, continue to challenge others.
I'm not going to argue with you on that point.
Del, what's your reflection on some of this, since you're in it every day?
Yeah, well, actually, you know, you have a lot of great thoughts there, and I began thinking about, and again, going back to our conversation last with Karen Pittman, she was talking about how this is a really important time for our field, especially as it relates to the emotional side of trying to meet kids' needs. So I just wanted to hear what you believe would be best served for us as a field, or even as an individual, like after school programs, and meeting those needs and bringing those things to the forefront right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to start out by saying I fundamentally don't know, and that's where we're starting, is that we're in unprecedented times, you know, and it's like
Yeah.
it's trite to say it, but like we don't know what the experience of being essentially isolated for a year and a half, and in some cases exposed to overexposed to challenges, to trauma in some cases, right? In some cases, dealing, you know, just operating in very, very difficult circumstances, you know, young kids taking care of younger kids. In other cases, thriving too, and discovering all kinds of ways that they can be successful that are not school-based, right? So I want to recognize that too. But we don't know what that experience will have on individuals or collectively, right? We
Right.
we know that, you know, children are more resilient than adults in general, and we know that, you know, I mean, we see it just the little bit that I've been able to hear and see of school reopening. You know, we see people's spirits thriving and being so thrilled to get back with friends and community and all of that. But I think that to try to answer your question more directly, I think that what is necessary is a very intensive focus on the emotional and mental well-being of everyone involved. You know, and that's not something new. It's sort of like what I was saying before. Like, we've been talking about that in after school for a long time. And at LA's Best specifically, a few years ago, we started to engage in the process of becoming what we believe to be the first really large scale trauma-informed expanded learning system in the country. Now, I say that believed to be because we tried to sort of figure it out, and it's really hard to know what all is going on out there. And I can send you some links with some stuff that we've written up about this stuff at LA's Best. It's a little outdated now because it's pre-COVID, but you know, we partnered with the school district mental health department, who turned out to be a very progressive, amazing, inspirational, very equity focused group of people, and invested in our own team to look at this trauma informed movement and how, you know, how expanded learning programs interface with that, and how we can get closer to what we mean, which is that we really want to value every child and every adult's whole self, right? And invest in their whole self. And mental and social emotional health and well-being is a critical part of that. I think that there's the potential right now in this new reality we're in to shift our culture. I mean, this goes beyond schooling, and this goes beyond expanded learning, to be able to really embrace getting mental health support on a regular basis as like acceptable, as something that is without shame and without consequence. You know, I mean, the way I think about it, I think about that, you know, vision health, there's vision health, right? There's dental health, there's mental health, there's all kinds of, you know, you could go down the list, but like, you know, in terms of vision care, for example, like everybody needs vision care throughout their life. Some people might just need a quick check every once in a while. Some people need glasses since they were in third grade, like me. You know, it changes. You go through seasons where suddenly things are changing. You really need to focus on it. Same with, you know, your teeth are another great example, like probably even a better example. Everybody needs to see the dentist once in a while, you know, and some people need really intensive work and proactive work, and some people need treatment, you know, and then they can go years with, you know, really thriving on that investment. Well, imagine if the same was true, if we talked about mental health in the same way. If I could say, you know, I'm gonna leave school tomorrow early because I have a therapy appointment, just like I have a dentist appointment, and without any, even as I said it just now, I felt a little embarrassed, like even just saying it, you know. I used to do a thing when I talk about this. We used to do workshops at conferences, and we'd talk about this stuff, and I would be in a group of people, like actually in a room with a group of people you remember in person. Well, Delmar, you know, because you're teaching in school now, right?
Yeah.
And I would ask them, like, who here has seen a dentist in the last year? And most people would raise their hand. And who's seen an eye doctor in the last year? And, you know, several people would raise their hand. And because they knew what the topic was, they could see where I was going. And I would kind of like let it sit for a second and say, I'm not going to ask the next question that you're expecting because it would make us so uncomfortable. Even just the idea that I might ask who's been to a mental health professional in the last year just made us so uncomfortable that I got a little flushed, and I knew what was coming.
Yeah.
It's so wired into us, and everybody thinks that it's their cultural background is especially sort of difficult about mental health, but it's really, it goes across cultures, and then more so for some than others, and it expresses itself in different ways than in others. But I think that that's what required. It's not just what we do in school and what we do in after school. What's required is a big change to our culture.
So absolutely, and one of the things that we'll be focusing on in upcoming segments is with funders around that issue, and really challenging and asking how can they better support that side of it, as opposed to where they've traditionally spent and been. So that's a topic that we're going to try to unpack here coming in the future. So begin to this has been fascinating, and it's been very school heavy, which is good, or I say school based. What I happen today to be sitting in a high school this evening, as we are talking to you, looking to launch a maker space. Cool. And so just around the corner there's some folks drawing a mural, and we're just really sprucing up the space. But when you started talking earlier, Eric, about just the reality of how we all had to make shifts, and you all especially, on the front lines, that our old buddy Richard Murphy always talked about, why can't schools be more community spaces? Yeah. Why can't they be out there open all the time and have this seamless transition? And certainly LA's Best has done that well, and others still kind of fight, even right now, I couldn't go into a restroom right now because it's locked. So, baby steps, right? So we'll all kind of make that, but it begins to make me think about Richard. And I had mentioned this, prior to coming on, that it's one of the things that certainly the three of us share, and some of the folks we've spoken with have in common. And so we always like to take a moment and just, honor his memory, but also just ask kind of what Richard kind of meant to you in your career. And if you have something that you wanted to share in that way that was, germane or not germane, it's up to you, but we always like to take a moment and be able to recognize it.
Yeah, gosh. Well, I mean, I was lucky to know Richard at all, and I didn't have as intensive a sort of mentoring relationship as some people got to have. And so I didn't get to spend as much time with him as I would have liked, for sure. But I mean, Murphy was just an inspiration as a human being, right? So just in terms of his spirit, keeping a very coy sense of humor about the whole thing, and remembering that why did we get into this in the first place? And yes, it's for these big, heavy, dignified goals, but it's also because we wanted to be in a space where we could play, right? We wanted to be with like-minded people who wanted to talk about ideas and help each other and all of that. And so there's something in that that's just the spirit of him that I think still helps me. But in terms of specifically around the things we've been talking about, it's thinking at scale. I mean, he really pushed me to think much bigger than I was ever thinking. Well, it's when you just are talking about some little program, and he says, well, but how can we take this national or something? And it's what are you talking about? I don't even know what that means, Or when he was once imagining, even before I was the CEO of LA's Best, when Carlos was still there and I was just working with both of them, he was imagining an LA's Best Institute where we would help other expanded learning programs. And I mean, he drew it out. He was imagining this, putting a glass building on top of a school so that we could be transparent. And I mean, it was just this amazing image, and, back of a napkin kind of thing. And it made me really excited and then nervous, because I felt I was supposed to get it done, right? He was the idea guy, and I was supposed to run off and take the napkin and run off and execute. I'm I have no idea how to do this. But it's like an exercise, forcing yourself to not think small, right? And to think big impact. And And also I want to say as a manager, or in his case, he wasn't my manager, he was actually my client for a while as a consultant and doing some of the youth mapping curriculum that came after you all. I mean, you put in so much of the initial work into that. And he, a lot of times when you're a consultant, you have a client and it's never right? The work is never right. It's like they ask you to do something, but they don't really totally get it. So you bring it back and it's like, they have to see they have to see something to react to it in order to just know, no, not that, and it's this iterative process, and it can really get you down because you just feel like you're just being criticized, right? Richard found a way to just be a cheerleader, just find the parts that he loved and help you grow those, and it's positive youth development in its essence. It's like, don't worry about what you're not good at or the parts that aren't so great of what you're making or whatever. Focus on the strengths, focus on, and the great parts, and just grow them. And eventually it's like, if you're making a garden and you focus on all the things that are growing really well, those things will take over the whole garden. And, you don't have to worry about anything else. And he did that. He was a dream to work with in that way, because he just, he made me feel like I was more creative than I felt before I had worked with him. And he would say, I'm not the creative one, you're the creative one. So you go and think of something. And it's like, I realize now, like, he was full on Mr. Miyagi from Karate Kid. Like, he was making me do all the work, right? And making me feel really good about it. It's like the Tom Sawyer painting the fence scene or whatever. But it was brilliant, and it was a lovely interaction every time, along with just being sort of fun, and you kept you on your toes. I mean, I'm not a prankster the way he was. But just to remember any of those little moments, it just still brings me to sort of a little bit of joy and delight. And he's one of the people, I'm sure you've also lost, a lot of wonderful people. I've lost a lot of people, and there are some people who I go to in my mind, and I can go to them and ask them for advice, and I can still hear their voice. So their voice is that strong and I wouldn't argue whether that's them actually talking to me from beyond, or whether they instilled their values in me so much that I'm creating the response. I don't think it matters. The point is that I can hear the advice when I ask for it. And that's like, that's some Dumbledore stuff right there. Use another literary analogy.
No, that's and I know Del can certainly resonate a lot with that too. I know I can, and just appreciate you even going through some of that. Just brings back good, memories for me and for our time that we did get a chance to work with him, both directly and then indirectly. We were his client as well at one point, and so just all of that.
Or you were his consultant, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he was the client. Yeah,
exactly.
Can I tell you a quick funny story from back in the day about Richard?
Yeah, you bet.
When I first heard of Richard, I was mad at him. I didn't know him. I hadn't met him, but I had known of him. But then my first indirect interaction, I was mad at him because he was throwing this big youth development conference in DC, and it might even be something you remember. It was in like 1998. And I think Karen Pittman was there, and it was a big deal at a hotel in DC, and he was trying to get Carla Sanger to go. And I was director of staff development at LA's Best at that time. And I was 26, maybe gonna be 26. She either didn't want to go or couldn't go, I don't know, but she was sending me. And he was not having it. He was not happy that she was not coming. She was sending me. And he said, I don't want anyone at this conference who could have been in an after school program themselves in the last 10 years. And so I was like, righteously indignant, just like a 26-year-old can be. And I went. Carla was just as stubborn as Richard, and she sent me. And it was a big deal for me. It was like a fancy business trip, and it was this fancy hotel that I stayed in, and the whole, the conference was staying in. And I brought my suit or whatever, and I think I must have read in some book, like, you turn on the hot water in the bathroom to steam your suit.
Sure.
So I did that, and I ordered room service, and I was eating and watching TV, and I was so happy. And all of a sudden I was like, the suit. And I went into the bathroom, and it had totally flooded like flooded the whole bathroom, came out the bathroom and had soaked the carpet like thoroughly, to the point that I had to call them and tell the hotel. And I was like, I'm really sorry. I just totally flooded the room, and they had to move my hotel room. So the next day was the conference. And I was so terrified all day that in my mind, the hotel was going to have told Richard, because I still was thinking like I was going to get in trouble. Like, like the hotel was just, they weren't going to tell. They didn't even know who Richard was. Like, and I was so nervous all day that I was going to be in trouble with Richard and therefore Carla, my boss, because I had flooded the hotel room after he said he didn't want this, snotty-nosed kid coming to his fancy conference or whatever. Anyway.
No,
I eventually got the chance to tell him that story when we were working together, and he laughed hard,
Oh, I'm sure. And he had a great laugh.
Yeah.
Eric, we can't thank you enough for taking some time to chat with us, and certainly sharing some important, just what you've been doing and what the organization's been doing, and then ways for, I think, others out there to challenge themselves, in that kind of Richard Murphy spirit of challenging ourselves to think what is possible, and not focus on what isn't. That's definitely one of the things that stays with me each day from him. So again, thanks for the robust conversation. Del, any parting thoughts here as we say goodbye?
Hey, no, just again, thanks, Eric. This was really some quality stuff, and I think our listeners out there will really be able to catch a lot of good meat from you sharing. So we just appreciate you sharing your knowledge and insight with us and with the field. So truly, thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate what you guys are doing to, make these conversations happen. And I could feel Murphy pleased, that his many mentees and everything are still out here trying to do something, trying to keep the movement going. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Yeah, you too. Take care.